Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today, we're talking about A Complete Unknown, the 2024 Bob Dylan film starring Timothée Chalamet and directed by James Mangold. And I'm excited to welcome a panel of guests. First, returning to the show and making a welcome habit of it is set decorator Regina Graves. Regina, it's always nice to see you.
Glad to be back again.
Next, making his second appearance on the podcast, and once again at Regina's invitation, I might add, is property master Michael Jortner. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks, Regina.
Thank you both. And finally, making his below the line debut, second assistant director Brad Robinson. Brad, I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here. Good to see y'all.
Now, Brad, is it fair to describe you as a longtime listener but first-time caller?
Yes, that's a good one. Yes, long-time listener, first-time caller.
I've been wanting to say that. Now, a warning for listeners, today's conversation will contain spoilers. We're going to jump right in. My first question, if Wikipedia is to be believed, the film was first announced back in January 2020, ran into the COVID juggernaut, et cetera, et cetera. When did each of you get involved, and what was the state of production when you did? I don't know who was first or what the order was, but anybody can jump in.
I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe Michael was spoken to before. I wasn't involved in that 2020 pre-COVID thing. I'm not sure anyone was in New York. I think there was talk about it in New York and producers knew that it was coming in. I was actually interviewed and hired, I would say the first go around. I think it was 2023. And we started up and had a couple of weeks of pre-production. I think we were like 2 weeks away from actually shooting. And then we were shut down due to the actors strike, writers acting strike. It was one of those. I can't even remember at the moment. But I joined back then, and then I waited for the movie to come back in, I think we started up again in 2024 because I really wanted to do the project and ended up doing it. But I think we had different other people involved. There were, a lot of the crew weren't originals.
Yes, I was not an original either. I came on in 2024 in January, but I had been approached about it around Thanksgiving time. And, before that, when I had heard that the prop master, that Diana Burton, who was on it originally, was doing something differently. And so I got a call to do it. And I was very happy to come on board.
What about you, Brad?
And I was late as well. When the movie shut down during the strike, when it came back afterwards, the production and AD teams had all left for another movie. So they had hired all new production and ADs. So I think my timing's probably about Michael's. I think I got called about Thanksgiving or Christmas of December of 2023. And then I started prepping in February of 24.
And so I think it was about 3 months of principal photography. Is that right? So what was the shooting period? When did filming begin?
We started the end of March near the end, a couple weekends and end of March. And then we went through early mid-June. Started out at 55 days, I believe. We ended up being 61, 62, all said and done.
Yeah. And I should add, I mean, the script that we had the first time around when I was on and we were, supposed to be shooting in 2 weeks. When I came back, I mean, the script was totally changed. There were things that we weren't supposed to do that were now added. And it was a lot of it was the same, but very different as far as like how many locations and how many sets we would have, things like that.
We had a lot of talk when we were prepping, even while we were shooting, of old regime, new regime, because there was a lot of us who came in, like Michael and us, and again, the first AD myself, we were all kind of piggybacking on work had been done for a year or something, and then post-strike, we all came back, so it was kind of a bit of a puzzle of piecing together, but we showed up, like some locations have already been picked that we never saw, like certain roads you've already gone down that we just had to jump in the middle of, while there were some others we started from scratch. So there was a lot of like piecing together the entire time of
Definitely
what had started and then when we came on. Yeah.
Definitely. And a lot of things that had been discussed seemed to have changed anyway. So it sort of was like a whole new project from the get-go.
When we came back, it was definitely a whole new movie. And I needed more prep time. And, Michael, I think, everything that might have been purchased before or, talked about before had changed. And
Yeah.
I'm sure things changed for Brad too. I mean, we had a great crew the first time around, but I have to say the second time around, no offense to anyone from the first time, I think the second time was a charm.
I want to come back to that, some of that back and forth you guys talked about. But first, just let's remind our listeners, as we've discussed on the show before, this is a period piece. And so, just by the nature of the filming you're doing, there's just a lot of invisible, I would say, heavy work that needs to be done to pull off something like this. Talk a little about some of your specific challenges. And then I want to compare that expectations for delivering on that versus what you're describing of some, things actually shifting in the middle.
Well, I mean, first off, I don't know if it's spoiler alert or not, but we did film the entire movie in New Jersey. So that was immediately presented a challenge in transforming certain neighborhoods in Jersey City and Hoboken to be Greenwich Village. And in doing that, myself, Regina, everybody brought a lot to the table to help assist with that endeavor. For me, especially, every scene had a lot of really detailed bits that some ended up on camera in the film, some did not, but we definitely filmed them all. That, every background person had their own story. Every scene had multiple things going on that were not part of the main action. So there was just a constant need to be supplying more and more to help, foster that vision.
I'd have to agree with Michael. I mean, I think that was probably our biggest challenge, turning New Jersey or Jersey City and Hoboken into, Greenwich Village of the 1960s. I don't know if I should get into when we actually started filming, but we would jump to, we would see things inside that we weren't supposed to see. Those were some other challenges. We were never supposed to go inside of a bar, and then we end up inside of a bar, and we weren't supposed to see down one street, and then we end up
Exactly.
seeing way
That's a
down
good.
the street, and we're all shuffling around to move.
We're gonna look this way,
Yeah.
this way,
Yeah.
this way, and then we show up on the day, and for some reason you turned your back, and now we're gonna look this way.
Obviously it's really hard, especially, one scene we were in Paterson, New Jersey, and we had one whole end of the street, a couple of sides of the street dressed period correct. And then for some reason, we ended up all the way down on the main road in Paterson on the corner where there was no dressing whatsoever. And we just had to shuffle and dress it as best we could. And Michael had to move cars down and, moving the extras down. And it was just every day was something like that.
Yeah.
Where we were hit with a challenge. It was like, okay, what can you do? What can you do today for us?
Yeah, and like every period film, you choose your block or two, you dress it, and then when you turn the corner, you're completely somewhere else. And in some of the neighborhoods in New Jersey, when you turn the corner, you're on like the busiest block in that neighborhood with buses and trucks and hundreds of people going down the street in both directions. And they're like, okay, we need to hide this side of the street. And you've got like 3 or 4 things left that's not being used that you're trying to position just right to camera.
And my biggest probably obstacle would have been the people of it all, the extras. We had 4,200 extras all in, and everybody had to go see hair and makeup and wardrobe in advance. They had to get approved or would get rejected. So that would be one part of it, and just figuring out the looks of it all. And Michael and I worked a lot together actually on backstories, because
Oh yeah.
we didn't have a lot of conversations with Jim about the extras and what they're going to look like and what they're going to be. So I would literally like every week cast the extras with extras casting. I say, we're going to the bar. I want this many, that many, and rolled the dice. And more times than not, we lucked out. But because of that, we didn't have a lot of conversations about what people would be doing. So Michael would be great. He'd have a bunch of gack on his truck that we could just pull out, like a cart or a bicycle or something like this. Or we'd come up with some things like, this day we're going to have a street construction or something like that, just to make life happen, because we were kind of doing it on our own, which was both good and bad. It's good that you kind of have the free will to do what you want, but it's bad because if you mess up, it's on you. And the other thing with the people, I got to say, is like you mentioned, it's period, it's 1960. Much of our audience are young people of the 60s. They're in their teens or 20s. So it's not difficult, but it is a bit of a challenge to walk current day 20-year-olds on how to act like 20-year-olds in the 60s. Body language is different. Certain things are different. Just your walking is different. When your reaction in a concert is different. So we had a lot of training we had to do over and over again with people so they looked like they fit in the settings that Michael and Regina would create for us to be in.
Teaching people how to smoke cigarettes, how to hold
Yeah.
cigarettes,
Yeah. It's a good one.
hold a camera, still camera, 16 millimeter film camera, all these things that people have not really dealt with much. And then you add the concert to it, all the concert performances, all the equipment, just setting everything up for that to be recorded live presented its own challenge.
Now, were the concerts done sort of all over, I don't know, some period of time, or were they spread out over the course of filming? How did that work for you guys?
They bounced around. The festival stuff was together. We shot I'll go backwards, but we shot the nighttime finale in 1 week on location. Prior to that, we shot the daytime stuff in that same festival for the Monterey the year before, like 3 or 4 days. And then other stuff we would pick and choose. We'd shoot a club here one day, and then maybe 2 weeks later we'd shoot Carnegie Hall. Then maybe a couple weeks later we'd bounce. So we kind of bounced around a lot. And then until the end, the recording studio at the end, that was all one chunk on a stage.
I think we exhausted most of the mid-sized concert venue theaters in New Jersey that were within like an hour to an hour and a half drive.
Now, in terms of the locations for you, Regina, was this bouncing around and shifting a problem as well, or did you have a pretty good idea of where they were going to be when?
No, I don't think it was a problem. I think everything was scheduled and, put together pretty nicely. Like if we were shooting down one part of New Jersey, we would, shoot all of those locations kind of in the same time period. So I had time to like dress sets. It was all put in kind of groupings. So we would just dress them, like I said, and then move on to the next one. Or I would have crews left behind. Like I had a whole totally, a totally different crew working on the exterior, like street scenes in Jersey City and Hoboken. And then I would be concentrating on like, the stage sets and then other locations, and we would bounce around. But I have to say, not only because Brad's on here, but I think our schedule was pretty manageable. It was a heavy load, but I think I never felt like, oh my God, we're never going to get that done. Like I never felt like we didn't have enough time to rush anything. The only time I ever felt like I wasn't ready was when Jim would come on set and then, because directors do that, just change everything. And then I would just say, oh my God, am I working on a different movie? That was just fine. But as far as like scheduling and locations, even though it was spread all around New Jersey, I think it was grouped very well.
We definitely fell into a kind of a routine on set every day, which would kind of be to show up and then look at the set, and then there'd probably be like 30, 40, maybe an hour of just reconfiguring things multiple times until we arrived at exactly what was needed. And then we'd start shooting, and it would just, every day it would sort of,
Yeah.
you knew that when you were coming to work in the morning, there might very well be a complete reorganization of what was there.
I mean, I'm a little dumbstruck because, again, knowing that a period piece is already
You're dumbstruck. You should have been there.
Well, I mean, it's got a challenge anyway. And to do it in a way that doesn't start to feel like a caricature of the time period, doing it last minute, I think it's a tipping point that's very easy to fall on that side of it. But I never felt that watching this film, that things were getting like too on the nose. Just again, under those circumstances, I'm just honestly, I'm surprised that it looks as good as it does.
It felt, I mean, everything was there, all
Everything was
the
there.
set decoration, all the props, all the extras, costumes. And as we just sort of put people into place and started to figure it out, and they would work out the camera move, things would just move around organically. And sometimes it would be a small changes here and there, but other times, or a couple of times, we ended up really like
Yeah.
going into another direction. But at the end of the day, we ended up getting everything we wanted and what we needed. And it worked out well. It just sort of sometimes was a little bit more of a heavy lift.
I feel like it wasn't that Jim didn't like when he came on set, didn't like something. I just felt like he may have thought of things differently once he arrived to set and maybe like Michael said, organically. But it was never something that he asked for something that wasn't there, or he didn't get what he wanted. We always had more than enough, and that was
Yes.
always the great thing. If he asked for something, we always had set decorating, always had it, props always had it, costumes always had it. Like we always gave him what he wanted. Just things just started to
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
change every day.
We started small. We did a couple small days in New York, like a courthouse scene one day and inside the courthouse, and then some stuff at Pete Seeger's house. So in those small confines, we learned about things changing. So by the time we moved to the streets and the concerts, we kind of knew to prepare for it. So we'd have extra stuff in our back pocket. I'd throw 5 extra, like additional extras in our back pocket for this. Michael would have some extra things here, and set dressing had their things. So we learned by the time we got big how to adapt. It wasn't like day one we had 200 extras and going down the street and it all got changed. So we were able to adapt and move quick as a team.
We had that on day 2.
That was a learning. Yeah, that's when it all began.
But it was, but it was great. I mean, and also, Jim is a big personality, great guy, very creative, super smart, knows what he wants, but a very big personality. So just sort of working with him for the first time and navigating that, getting to know him first, and then realizing that everything that he's doing is just basically to make everything and the project better and service the scene that we're shooting, and coming up with a better way to film it, more creative, realizing what's there and seeing something different in the moment that we all react to.
Now, was it the first time for all of you working with Jim Mangold?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that I read online was some things he said about intentional inaccuracies. He said the movie was not a Wikipedia entry. Ironically, I read that on Wikipedia, and that he did not, quote unquote, feel a fealty to a documentary level of facts. Now, that's very interesting because I don't think people know the details of some of the history, but I'm curious whether that gives license for art department or Brad, your background, to have a similar sort of tolerance for anachronisms, or is there a double standard here that you guys really are going to be held to, like, that guitar was not available in 1963, or, Brad, to your point, how people walked or smoked. To what degree does that sort of idea about the movie help you, or does it actually be something that's even more difficult for you guys?
I was one of those. I actually called out a lot of the inaccuracies during prep with production. I got into a big thing with the music department because we were recording songs before Bob Dylan did, and we were trying to match the artists, like who were the artists in the session, in the studio for this session. And it's the whole story about Al Cooper and how he meets Al Cooper, and we record songs that Al Cooper recorded because he recorded them after. It's a whole wormhole. Anyway, so I would call them that. And the other thing that I remember I pulled out was there's the famous line where it happened like a year later in England where someone called him Judas on stage, and I was like, that didn't happen there. So I would pull that stuff off on people. But as far as like the artistic story of it, I at least personally did get stuck with a lot of matching, like make sure people are who they are, because we were recreating historical figures, people that you knew, whether they were actors or background people. So as far as like the looks of things, we had to be into it, and like what people were wearing, their clothes and their hairstyles. We were very much, because it was more of the time from that world. And I'm sure Michael and Regina are the same. It was more, maybe not the specificness of this instrument or that jacket, but the looks had to be specific.
I would say, guitars, equipment, that we tried to stay as historically accurate as possible. There are certain iconic looks like sunglasses that Bob wore or what have you, but some of the other things, bags and things like that, record players, we tried to match what we could. We recreated album covers and what have you, but there are some things that, for me at least, it was more of just a vibe of the time, the people, the place, and not making sure everything was exactly accurate, although we tried to be accurate where we could, and I think the instruments were a very important part of it.
The same went for production design and set decoration. I mean, we wanted to be as accurate as we could. And there's so many, photographs of like Bob's apartment, and all of these things have been documented so many times in photos. So we were trying to match things as much as we can, or as much as we could. And obviously, it's 50, 60 years afterwards. So that's hard. So we just tried the best that we can to make it feel the period and be accurate in all the other ways. artistically, we wanted it to be the same.
Yeah. Especially with the recording studio, we tried to deal with the microphones as much as possible to be, I mean, they may have not been the exact microphone that was used at that venue in that moment, but we tried to keep everything was nothing was being used that was not out later in the time period from when we had it, you know. But when we were looking in the studio and matching photographs from the studio, we tried to be as accurate as possible with the look of the microphones, how the stands were, just sort of recreating certain moments that became very iconic photographs.
Now, Brad, something you said, I'll start with you, but the question's for everybody. Were you familiar with the actual history? In other words, were you a Bob Dylan fan before you got involved with the project, or you just went deep on, like you said, these inaccuracies and such once you became an assistant director of it?
I am a Bob Dylan fan. When I got called for this movie, my wife was like, "This is the perfect project for you." But I am actually, and I didn't know that era. I'm actually I'm a Bob Dylan fan through a band called The Band, who played with Bob when he went electric. So I know Bob Dylan and am a bigger fan of post 65, like the 65 through 75 era. But I did know this. Like I had his performances at Newport on DVD that I brought in to show like my second and my staff to watch. I have Bob Dylan books, so I know of the era and some of the folk music and the folk musicians that are in it. So I knew it somewhat, which helped me out a good bit.
Regina, Michael, what about you guys? Any relationship with the material ahead of time?
I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. Again, I love the early stuff, but I'm a bigger fan of some of the post 65 electric work. But it was great to go back into it and get some more books, do some more research, and really get into that particular time period because it's a very specific time period in the history of Bob's music and the history of rock and roll music in general.
I'm the oddball here. I really wasn't a Bob Dylan fan. My older sister was. I knew his music. What really attracted me to this project was the time period. I love period films. But after doing a lot of research and reading books about him and reading the script, listening to the music more, knowing his whole story, I became a Bob Dylan fan. So I was converted.
Now, speaking of Bob Dylan, I'm curious whether this played out on set at all. He seems to have kind of a contrarian relationship with the film. There's reports about how he worked with Jim ahead of time. He gave notes. Some of these changes we're talking about were at his suggestion, but then he's been somewhat dismissive of the film with some of his comments. And I'm just curious whether any of that sort of outside influence made its way onto set.
I mean, I would say the only actual feedback in any way that I had received through Bob's manager, who was a producer on the film, is when we were recreating his handwritten lyrics and things of that nature. There were specific, there's a lot online of handwritten lyrics on various auctions all over the internet, and they couldn't authenticate any of them. So they did not want us to use any of that as any kind of guidance as how the lyrics may have looked or been represented. So we basically were told to purposely not try to recreate anything in the way that any of that looked, because they didn't want us to be representing something that they couldn't authenticate as like that's how Bob's lyrics wrote for Blowin' in the Wind or what have you. And Jim wasn't really interested in doing that either. We had been given a lot of handwritten letters. He had written letters from Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan from when he did Walk the Line. And we had those letters, but we rewrote them because there was different content that he wanted to be spoken on camera in the script that was not written in the letters. So we just sort of kept everything in the spirit of how it would be. But that was the only time that I had ever heard anything of any being weighed in from anybody.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything either.
I will say, ironically, since in the last maybe month or so, they did a Bob Dylan exhibit at the Woody Guthrie Bob Dylan Centers in Oklahoma based on our film. And one of the curators there contacted me because they were given a whole array of our programs and handwritten, a lot of the graphics and handwritten props and things that they put into the exhibit there. And they were asking us where we made them and who made them because they thought that they looked a lot better than the recreations that they had made. But there is now an exhibit that has some props, costumes, and they did a whole retrospective of the movie in relation to Bob Dylan.
Talk to me about working with these actors. How'd they approach this material? And, there's, we don't need to name any by name. There are stories out there about some of these guys. There are stories online about the approach. How'd that play out on set?
Well, Timmy was all in. I mean, he was all in on Bob, and I get it because he's a young guy, and if this was his shot, he was going to lead a dramatic film as an adult. He's not Wonka. It's a legit thing, so I get it. So he was full on in from the time he showed up to the time he left. It was very, very rare. He would never talk to anybody, or at least not in my world that much, like about Tim stuff. It was all the movie, it was all Bob, it was all this. Everyone always asked me like, was his girlfriend there? I was like, nope, never showed up. Like he was all about the work. So he was kind of his own little bubble doing his thing. Everybody else, and this is not to say that he was not great, but everyone else was fantastic. Like Monica, Elle, Edward Norton, like everybody was great. Everybody was like excited to be there. They were like, everybody gave it their all. Especially those days we would shoot the festival stuff where we'd have like 25 actors back in the trailers and in background on set, just hanging out, having a great time. Like we had a really great cast. They were all really great.
Everybody was great to work with. When a lot of the actors and actresses were performing or wanting to rehearse when they weren't on camera constantly, it sort of added another layer of sort of doing everything that's going on camera, keeping track of everything that's being handed out to various people who are wandering around the set and the surrounding area with the guitar. In some cases, the only
Right.
guitar you have.
Yeah, I
of
feel like we
this
were
stuff.
constantly asking Michael,
Yeah.
like, Michael, we need another guitar for Ed,
Yeah.
or we need this for Monica. We need this. Like they want to just do that. Yeah, we're constantly harassing Michael for more stuff.
And a lot of rehearsals that happened on the weekends, and people wanted things home with them and getting things there. And so there was a little bit of that. But all in all, it all worked out. There was definitely a trail of items to be picked up at the end of the day, wandering around from everybody. But, that's what happens most of the time anyway.
Favorite scenes, either how it came together because of the challenge or something subtle that maybe viewers don't notice, but was a lot of work.
Probably the end, just because it was. We didn't shoot it at the end, but it was like the culmination. I feel like everybody's work. We had 26 actors on set. We had anywhere from 150 to 500 extras. We had a full stage that, Regina and those guys would design the stage and backstage, the whole grounds, basically fairgrounds. Michael's got instruments and trunks and amps and stuff and drum kits out the wazoo that we're moving in and out for different acts. Cause we had not only just, Bob Dylan, we had Johnny Cash performing sometimes and Joan Baez. So just all of those moving parts coming together, I think was really us pulling off what we wanted to pull off the right way.
I think for me, my favorite scene to shoot was the arrival at the Viking Hotel we shot it in Cape May, where they arrive on their motorcycle and there's a huge crowd of people at the hotel. They come up, they meet, they're getting checked in. That scene just really created like a very fun vibe and atmosphere for the movie. Sort of like, a lot of the things that we shot were kind of New York City, dirty at the time. Jim was very insistent on things being dirty, more garbage, more this, more that. And then we got there to a very, beach surrounding, and it was a beautiful day, and just sort of all these people, all the colors, all the vehicles, it just really came together really well.
Interesting about that as well, Michael, and maybe Regina, you got some thoughts as well, is actually the motel has kind of an arc through the film as well, right? Because again, there's those scenes in the middle and then there's the final scenes that the motel is a character in that as well and is different from that initial introduction, right? There's a different feel for those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
We filmed all the exteriors, but we actually had the interiors of the motel built on the stage. So we would go back and forth a lot through different time periods.
Yeah.
And I think it worked really well the way, I don't think anyone could tell a difference of the stage sets or the actual motel.
Yeah. They would pop out of doors, go into doors, come up the stairs at the end of the night, and then be in a set, come back out. It really worked well.
Yeah. And then like the party scenes. And I mean, how many times did you guys reset, the room for parties and
Yes.
whatever, mess and beer bottles and cigarettes and ashtrays. And there was just that throughout the filming.
there were a couple of scenes that, for whatever reason, just seemed like they were very challenging to complete in 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, well,
And we
yeah,
always kept on going back, resetting them up. Well, we gotta get one more shot. Let's set up this whole thing, Yeah.
yeah. That arrival at the motel, though, Michael, that is a great scene, and I'm gonna give us credit for that because, like all of us, because as we all know, this was not a film with an unlimited budget, so we were always
No.
fighting against money, 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 and I remember having many discussions about that arrival scene, about we need more extras. We need more cars. We need buses. We're trying to sell this. And I remember like Michael was selling it and Doug, my boss, and we kept selling, we need more to sell this because they're trying to shrink, shrink, shrink. And we're like, this is his arrival at Newport. And I just remember, Michael, if you remember that too, I just remember we kept battling. We need two buses, we need
Yeah.
an extra car and figuring all that, just making it the registration area and like getting that bustling with people.
Yeah. It really just was one of the, yeah. And then dressing the pool area. It was just like it was so much, there were so many layers going on there in that
Yeah.
particular set that was great. And also, I also loved the TV studio. Very different, but the scene at the TV studio was also great.
Yeah.
Was that Rainbow Quest that you liked?
Yes, that was great.
That was a really great set.
Yeah.
I think my favorite was the Columbia studio, the recording studio at the end. For me, I think that was a really beautiful set, and seeing it all come to the end, and Timmy singing live, and you got the chills. I mean, it was a really,
Yeah.
those couple of days there were kind of like magical, not to be corny, but
Yeah.
yeah, those were the best sets.
It was the end of the film when we shot it,
Yeah.
end of our schedule, but it really went chronologically through his first recording sessions all the way to the end. So we shot that in order. So you started off with him singing acoustic, some band members came in, and other musicians, then we had the full band. It just, for the finale, it really sort of culminated the whole musical arc of the film.
I was in awe just watching you guys build that because we were on the stage a lot near the end of the show. And as Michael said, it was the last set that we pieced. So we'd be shooting on another set and I'd constantly be walking back every day and like watching the progress of the set being built from literally just like the borders and then the boards and the mics. And I spent days with technicians and cables coming in and testing microphones. I just remember watching the evolution of that set and just being like, this is amazing, the job you guys are doing.
Also, to be told, our actual stage was not very large to house the amount of sets that we had there and little pieces that popped up throughout. So it became sort of a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle because some sets that were supposed to be wrapped weren't wrapped and other sets were there. And then this set was being built right next to Bob's apartment. And we were there for a while and then we had to leave and we came back. So it just sort of kept on being, kind of on top of each other with a lot of that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where things ended up. Recognized through awards season, culminating in 8 nominations for the Academy Awards, but no wins. I imagine that comes across as disappointing. I know you never really know in a project how things are going to play out, but was there a sense on set that all of this effort, I don't know, that there would have been more recognition at the end? I'm just want to take your temperatures on how things sorted out in the end.
I don't know if on set, like, no one was ever talking about winning awards on sets. It was never discussed. But I will say we did not make our day for probably the first 2 weeks of the show. We was never make our day. And I remember Jim's mindset being like, well, they'll just see what they got. And when they realize what we've got, we'll tell them we need more days and then we'll get it. So we kind of went through that mentality for a while. We push. We kept shooting. He's like, we're getting great stuff. It looks good. So everybody knew that we were making something special or at least something really worth our while. And so it was more that kind of a thing of like, if we'll show them what we're making and that'll get us what we need to get more so than just like, we're going to win Oscars or we're going to win awards.
Right.
It was never really spoken about.
But I do think that people knew that something special was being made in the project. The fact that the performance of Timmy was really special, the performance of the other actors, all the live music, it just was something that was really not necessarily done in this way. Like every take we would do, Timmy would perform the entirety of the song and we'd do like 30, 40 takes a day of that song from different angles.
And then you do 2 other songs you wanted to
Yeah.
do.
So it just was like a constant, so there was a lot of physical effort put in by him and every other actor involved throughout the course of the shoot.
I think everybody put their own weight on their shoulders. Like, I feel like everybody knew what we were getting involved in, and you were working with such high level of people across the board, that you didn't want to be the department looked down upon, like, oh, we're pulling them up. So like, I like killed myself on making extras and finding extras and creating extras you wouldn't even maybe notice. Like at Newport, we have people like Odetta, Lightning Hopkins, June Carter, her mom. We have a Peter Yarrow as an actor in the film, a character. We created a Paul and Mary as background. So every time there was a scene with Peter Yarrow, Paul and Mary were somewhere in the background, like little things like that. Like everybody was doing that on their own because you had to stay at the top of your game just to compete with everybody else and what they were doing. I feel like Michael was probably, the same way of pulling this and making this and, making the sets as good as they can be. Like walking on great sets is the best thing you can ever do when you're a set performer. When we come in and see like Regina's sets for the first time and they're great, then it's like, okay, I have to live up to this. Like the background has to look this good. They have to perform this well because we're put in a world that looks that good. And that just happened for 60 days.
And, actors can come in there, they could pick up anything, they could look at anything, they could use anything on the set. That also really just builds to the, because things just happen as you're filming. A lot of the scenes as written had very specific action, but there was also a lot of other pieces, little vignettes going on that we needed to, create and work on every day.
Like Bob's apartment. I mean, everything, like you said, Michael, when you walked on the set, we tried to make it as immersive as possible. So the actor could pick something up or go into a cabinet or walk into a store and what have you. We want to make it as real as possible. The daily challenges that we were given by Jim, although, I have to say, I enjoyed them. I can complain
totally.
if I want, but it really made the day. Maybe it might have set me back a couple of hours because I was opening set, changing things around, but you knew you were working on something special on this movie, just seeing everyone's performance and how everyone worked and how everything looked and how Jim was directing it and how Faden was shooting it. I mean, everything.
Yeah.
I think everything was just top. And it was a really fun, it was a hard project, but a really fun project to work on. It makes me proud watching it.
Definitely.
I think it's fair to point out, not to take anything away from maybe these other flashier films, but all of the work we're talking about to be successful in a period piece, the work itself has to be invisible. If it starts to draw attention to itself, it defeats the purpose. And it's only when people don't notice that you can be immersive. And as you said, both for the actors and for the audience. And so I think come recognition time, that can work against the film with all that work in the background, but clearly a lot of work. And as the point of this show, we like to draw attention to it. So really appreciate you guys sharing these stories.
Thank you.
Also, I will say that we definitely toured New Jersey as a state. We were all
up and down the state.
I mean, we touched almost every corner of the state, I would say.
A beautiful state.
I'm not saying it's not a beautiful state, but it's not when you're filming in Cape May, which is all the way at the bottom, and then you're coming back up and filming all the way on the west side and then all the way on the east side, a lot of miles.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get one set ready here and you're filming somewhere else. It's just, definitely.
And we hopped a bunch. It's like you're in Hoboken here, and then we're back at Patterson, and then we're up north, then we're back in Hoboken for 2 days, and then we're going to Newark, and then we're like, it wasn't like we were like set roots in like Patterson for 2 weeks. We hopped back and forth all the time.
Absolutely.
Well, are you guys all coming back for the sequel? I mean, it'll probably be a decade from now. We'll let Timothy put another 10 years on his frame, hop forward to some other time in Bob Dylan's life. But you guys all back for that?
We'll see.
We'll see.
I'm still around.
On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. It was great having you guys here.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info on our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media. Please check it out. Let our listeners know where next are we going to see your work. Brad, why don't you go first?
You probably won't see my work for a while. I haven't done a lot since Complete Unknown. I took a little bit of time off because I did 2 projects back to back, so I took some time to be home. So I don't have anything big projects that are upcoming out yet, but I have a podcast of my own called the Not Ready for Primetime Project. It's about the history of Saturday Night Live. We're talking about the early years, and we do old shows, and we interview writers and cast and stuff like that. So yeah, you can find, if you're a big fan of Saturday Night Live, check us out there, the Not Ready for Primetime Project.
Always happy to recognize a fellow podcast. Michael, what about you?
I did a film after this film, another film with Timothée Chalamet called Marty Supreme. That's probably coming out at the end of this year. That is a 1950s table tennis film that Josh Safdie directed.
A little more Timothée Chalamet for you? All right, we'll watch for that.
A little more.
Regina?
You probably won't see much of my work out either. I really haven't been working that much since then. I did work on a little thing for Martin Scorsese called Martin Scorsese Presents The Saints, which was on Fox TV. Other than that, waiting for something to come in.
Well, I'm rooting for all of you. Great having you on this show and look forward to having you back. Closing credits. Thanks to Curtis Pye for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Well, the promotion I've been running this season to recognize listeners who send me pictures of themselves in t-shirts has resulted in 0 submitted photos, but at least a couple of you did buy t-shirts. So to my anonymous supporters, you have my thanks. This is the last episode of season 23, but if any photos come in during the hiatus, I will recognize you when we pick back up with season 24. That, fingers crossed, will be just a few weeks away. Whether you're a longtime listener or a Bob Dylan fan that just discovered the show, I hope you'll stick with us. Thanks again from Below the Line. Are there other directions, either paths or rabbit holes we want to do about the set shoot and stuff? Is there like favorite stories that I can queue up?
I mean,
if there's a story you want to tell me. I'll do the prompt. Michael, tell
no.
Naively, Michael, what do you want me to ask about?
No, there are obviously a lot of stories that went on there. I don't know if
what, there's an off the record version of this podcast.
I will say this, there were some
we'll keep that one behind the paywall
that were, because of the nature of the film project and because of how we were trying to source and find various things, you ended up encountering a lot of, characters who were not involved in our project, but knew some of the people personally that were being represented. And they had their own sort of take and influence on certain things. With Pete Seeger in particular.
Like just how he's going to be represented or feedback on the Norton performance?
Not on the Norton, no, it happened, like we introduced, there were certain people that were not sort of contacted in terms of when they were doing the project. Like they spoke to Bob's people, they didn't speak to this person, they didn't want to speak to this person, and somehow or another Pete's family got into the ear of some people and made things more challenging for some of us.
I can imagine there's just sort of an echo through the set on something like that, which really doesn't appear on the other side of camera, but something that has to be dealt with.
But and then also a lot of people that were trying to get involved with the project. And somehow, and a lot of that sort of, for me, ends up being people that said that they had certain, equipment that we would be renting or having. And then it ended up being, well, I can give this to you or rent this to you, but I have to be there. And then they wanted, you ended up with a lot of that, which you didn't want to have around. A lot of people were taking a lot of pictures.
As well, yeah. Off-camera antics, but the sort of like trail along with getting a film like this done.
Yeah.